Good morning. Turn to Revelation, the book of Revelation, and turn to chapter 11. We're going to start at the end of chapter 11 this morning, where we were last week. Chapter 11, the two witnesses. So the two witnesses have been around now for 3.5 years. They started just as soon as the rapture, just after the rapture occurred, as soon as the 7-year period took off. There were two witnesses. We said they were Elijah and Enoch, and they came and they preached the gospel in front of the temple for 3.5 years, and nobody could kill them. It took a major battle. It took a war to get rid of them. Nobody could kill them. And verse 7 says, 11:7 says, when they have finished their testimony, the beast that comes up out of the abyss will make war with them and overcome them and kill them. So again, this isn't a little scrimmage. This isn't a little military action. It says in that verse, will make war with them. So I imagine that the beast threw just about everything he could at them for this 3.5-year period, and it took everything he had to finally kill them. And the beast is not the devil. The beast is not a demon. The beast is a man, and the beast here is the Antichrist. This is the Antichrist who has revealed himself at the halfway point, here, shown himself in the temple and interrupted the sacrifice. And so this is the beast. This is the prince that Daniel tells us is yet to come. If you read the book of Daniel, you'll find that Daniel prophesies on the last empire of the world, and he talks about a beast who is yet to come. And so this is him. This is who he is. And he's powered, of course, by the great dragon. And the great dragon, of course, is Satan. So the beast is powered by Satan. We have the unholy Trinity and the Holy Trinity. We have the beast, the dragon, and the false prophet over here, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit over here. The devil always tries to mimic the Lord, always tries to mimic God, but in the negative way, in the opposite way. Verse 8 says, and their dead bodies will lie on the street of the great city, which mystically is called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. Jesus laments the fact that Jerusalem is an area where many of the prophets have died in Jerusalem, and this is the same thing. There's just 2 more prophets now that have just died in Jerusalem. Matthew 23, verse 37, it says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, who kills the prophet and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together the way a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were unwilling. Behold, your house is being left to you desolate. So Jerusalem by now is so morally decayed that it's equated with Sodom and Gomorrah. It's just gone that bad. It's just that morally decayed. The world is just that morally decayed. And the same streets that Jesus walked on his way, you notice in the verse, back in our verse, it said, mystically it's called Sodom and Egypt, where also their Lord was crucified. I think that's important to realize, that the Lord on his way to being crucified walked on the same street where those men now are laying dead. And I think that verse kind of makes us want to think of that this is that Jesus also was another prophet that lay dead in that area. Verse 9, and those from the peoples and tribes and tongues and nations will look at their dead bodies for 3.5 years and will not permit their dead bodies to be laid in the tomb. I think this is interesting. They gloat, they look at their bodies, they leave them there. They won't let them be picked up. They won't let them be put into a tomb. And I think it says, look at verse 10, and those who dwell on the earth will rejoice over them and celebrate, and they will send gifts to one another because these 2 prophets tormented those who dwell on earth. And so these guys, they're finally dead, and it's like New Year's. It's like a big old party. I mean, everybody's celebrating. CNN's got balloons, the whole 9 yards, and the television is all over TV and the news, and these guys are finally dead. And I think people, all of a sudden, I think there's this big sigh of relief. And just as the party's going, they're thinking, okay, this is over. This has got to end it, right? I mean, all of this stuff that's happened up to this point for 3.5 years, it's over. We got to blame somebody. Let's blame these guys. So people, I think, are, no more flying angels, no more whoa, 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 no more seals being opened, no more trumpets being opened. This has got to be the end of it. And then people start coming out of caves and wherever they are, and look at verse 11. But after 3.5 days, the breath of life from God came into them, and they stood on their feet, and a great fear fell upon those who were watching. So I'm sure they were like, oh, shoot. Probably even worse than that, though. And I guess it's symbolic that Christ laid in the tomb for 3.5 or 3 days and 3 nights, and these guys were 3.5 days and 3 nights. So notice the great fear, it says, that fell on the people. That's just, basically you can interpret that as exceeding terror, as great, great terror. The people were terrified when they woke up, and they would be, because what did they represent? All of the things we just talked about. And so as soon as those people stood up, and verse 12 says, and they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, come up here. Then they went up into heaven in the clouds, and their enemies watched them. Yeah, that just took the party out of everybody, I bet. I like the way that, when I read that, here's what I think. And a great voice from heaven just came to them and said, come up here. And then immediately they went up into heaven in a cloud. Now the cloud would be the glory of God. That's that Shekinah cloud that would be the glory of God. And so they went up into this cloud. And the thing that gets me about any of this, anytime I read anything like this or study anything like this, is just, life to Jesus is just so nonchalant. Lazarus raised, get up. Get up. Boom, done. Blind man walk. Blind man see. Lame man walk. I mean, the great physician, Jesus, it's incredible the power. We just don't sometimes think of the power, but all of a sudden he says, get up, and they get up. Amazing. Yes?
Now, Ray, does this all happen at the 3.5 year?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, this is, the 2 witnesses preached for that 3.5 year period, okay. And then when the Antichrist showed himself and revealed himself, now their job is done. Verse 13 is interesting too, and it says that in that hour there was a great earthquake, and 1/10 of the city fell, and 7,000 people were killed in the earthquake, and the rest were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. So there's a couple things happening here. Think of this if you were alive at that time period. The first thing that would happen is that you would hear a day after, or that day you would hear a sudden news thing comes on. Huge earthquake in Jerusalem. Huge earthquake, 7,000 people killed. And you'd go, that's exactly what this thing said. 7,000, right to the number. Not 7,001, not 6,999. 7,000 people. This is prophecy. 7,000 people will die. And that when that happens, look what happens. And the rest were terrified and gave glory to the God of heaven. Again, God is in the saving business throughout this whole time period. He wants people to come to him. And this is just one more awesome sign that that's exactly what will happen. Okay, so verse 14, the second woe is past. Behold, the third woe is coming quickly. So once again, we're at the halfway point of the tribulation. And with the third woe, with the opening of the third woe, I believe this is when we enter into the second part of the tribulation. Verse 15 says, then the 7th angel sounded, and there were loud voices in heaven saying, the kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ, and he will reign forever and ever. The trumpet is accompanied by this loud voice in heaven, and I think that's you and I, the kingdom of the world, loud voices in heaven, and I believe that's probably you and I. That's probably all the saints. Remember, we're all gathered around his throne, and the 12 elders, and we're all going to be watching this event. We're going to be seeing this event as it takes place. And I think the testimony of the loud voices is you and I, and we're kind of anticipating. We're getting ahead of ourselves, but we're kind of anticipating at the end. See, this is kind of one of those things where it goes a little bit forward and a little bit backward at the same time. We're up there going, yes, God's taking back his world now. It's his. It's being ripped away from Satan finally after all these years. Psalm says this. It's interesting. It says this, now therefore, O kings, show discernment. Take warning, O judges of the earth. Worship the Lord with reverence and rejoice with trembling. Do homage to the Son, that he not become angry and you perish in the way. For his wrath, you see that? His wrath may soon be kindled. How blessed are all who take refuge in him. So this verse has been attributed to at this time period. This is in Psalms that it's a prophetical psalm. It's talking about the wrath of God. Now it could also mean the wrath of God. There could be a near prophecy and a far prophecy. It could talk about his wrath in the Old Testament as well. Acts 4:26 though says this: the kings of the earth took their stand, and the rulers were gathered together against the Lord and against his Christ. So it's kind of interesting. There's a little bit of, you can look through the Bible. As you look through, you'll find quite a few verses that will that kind of point to this destruction in this time period. 11:16, and the 24 elders who sit on their thrones before God fell on their faces and worshiped God. So we met the elders the first time in the 5th chapter of Revelation, and we see them again, and it looks to me like they're still sitting on their thrones. And this time, when this happens, they get up and they fall on their faces, knowing that this is a pivotal point, as we said before, because what happens is, at this point, the Antichrist reveals himself and God reveals himself. It's all out in the open. There's no more speculation of what's going on. We said that last week. Remember, there's no more speculation about what's going on. We know this is a battle against good and evil, and we know not only against good and evil, but we know it's against Satan and against God. We know exactly what's going on at this point. Verse 17, and they say, we give you thanks, O Lord God the Almighty, who are and who were, because you have taken your great power, and see this, you have begun to reign. That's what they mean before in the earlier verse when they said he's taken it back. The Lord now is beginning to reign. God is beginning to say, I'm taking this back. Jesus is saying, I have the deed in my hand. I've given the sub-deed to everybody else, to the people of the earth. I've split it up, and now I'm beginning. At this point, we're going to start taking everything back. And the word reign in that sentence, too, I mean, the best way to interpret that, it means to show yourself. That's basically the best way to interpret it. When they sing a king is reigning, it means the king is showing himself. And so now we know God is showing himself, Jack. Revelation 11:18, and the nations were, well, here you go. This is a good point, too. And the nations were what? Enraged. You know, the nations didn't go, well, wait a minute. What's going on here? You know, we see God in this. We see the devil in this. Let's go over here. No, they don't turn to God. They don't turn to God. Now, when he says the nations, he means the nations. He doesn't mean every individual in the nations. He means the nations. It's just the same way as saying in the Bible it tells us that the Jewish nation cannot accept Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior, that there's been a delusion on them and they can't accept him until the time of the Gentiles is fulfilled. So the nation as a whole can't accept Jesus Christ, but that doesn't mean an individual can't at any day. You see, it's Easter. So they're talking in generalities when they say the nations, but it says, and all the nations were enraged, and your wrath came. Now this is the time of this wrath, coming right now, halfway point. That's what they call the Great Tribulation, the wrath of God. And the nations were enraged, and your wrath came, and the time came for the dead to be judged, and the time to reward your bondservants and prophets and the saints and those who fear your name, the small and great, and to destroy those who destroy the earth. So we're kind of looking ahead a little bit there. The nations were enraged, and your wrath come, and your time is coming to be judging the dead. Eventually that's going to come in the next 3.5 years. And the servants and prophets and the saints and those who fear your name, the great and small, and to destroy those who destroy the earth. And so there's people and prophets and saints who will come to him, but the people who are trying to destroy the earth, he will destroy. So it's kind of a near and far prophecy over that 3.5 year period. At this halfway point, the Antichrist has shown himself, revealed himself. God has revealed himself through what is going on. We're at the better part of the point where we're at the part where the better part of people on earth now hate God. I mean, everybody that comes to Christ, I think, during that time doesn't have a long time. I mean, if you come to Christ during that time and accept him, I don't know this for sure, but just with so much of this going on and so much hate and so much evil, it's going to be, you know, let's say it's Christians now and non-believers, you know, now, and the other, and it's going to be it's even going to be worse. It's going to be, you know, every time it's going to be worse and worse and worse, and there's just so much hate and evil in the world that once you accept Jesus Christ, I just don't think you have a long time. I think you're a martyr at that point. point, you're martyred at that point. There are pockets of followers. There's 144,000 that we'll look at, and we'll get to them eventually. And then there's this whole nation of Israel that fled into them. We read that in Matthew. Remember, it said if you're on the roof, don't grab your coats. If you're pregnant, hopefully you're not pregnant during this time, because when the 144,000 go off into the wilderness, the nation of Israel is going to follow them, and they're going to be protected, as we'll find in the bubble out there. That's coming up. But there are survivors out there and people turning to Christ, but the majority of them, it looks to me like they don't last very long. And the word destroy in that sentence too, it says the small and the great, and to destroy those who are on the earth. It means that they were, basically the word destroy in that means corrupted. So it basically means that they're going to be, he's going to destroy those who have corrupted the earth, I believe is what you can look at it that way too. And that's what sin does. Sin just corrupts the earth, and sin has corrupted the earth for the last few thousand years. Romans 8:22 says this, "For we know that the whole creation groans and suffers the pains of childbirth together until now." All of creation is groaning under the weight of this sin and this evil. I mean, the earth itself is groaning for liberation from evil. I always like the point where Jesus came in on Jerusalem on that donkey on that morning, on that triumphant entry into Jerusalem, and the Pharisees and Sadducees said, "Teacher, tell your people to stop." You know, they were praising and glorifying him, and he said, "If they stop, the stones will yell out my name." He's that grand and that glorious, and the earth itself feels corruption, just like we do. I mean, it's hard to explain, but this is not the earth that God created for us. Verse 19, "And the temple of God which is in heaven was opened, and the ark of the covenant appeared in his temple. And there were flashes of lightning and sounds and peals of thunder, and an earthquake and a great hailstorm." This is interesting. You can tell Geraldo that it's not in the safe. That we know where it is. Yeah. What's that? Oak Island? It's not in Oak Island either. You know. The temple is in the ark is in the temple in heaven, and that's where it is, and that's safe and sound. And the key part about this is I don't know what this. I know what it means, and I'm not sure if it was opened. It doesn't really say, and I can't find out. It doesn't really say it was opened for us to see on earth, but it could be. It could be. It just says, "And the temple of God, which is in heaven, was opened, and the ark of the covenant appeared." But I think the significance of it is this. It's the same thing as when Christ died, and what they're trying to tell us is that we can see right into the Holy of Holies, that we have entree to God just like that. We can be in his presence just like that. And when we see that, it appears as if God is at home. Listen, go back and look at that. So we see the temple, the Ark of the Covenant appeared in his temple, and look at there. There were flashes of lightning and sounds and peals of thunder and an earthquake and a great hailstorm. If you remember, the seraphim on the Ark of the Covenant had their wings out like this. Remember the covering angels we talked about? And they had their wings out like this, and God would appear between those two angels. His spirit would appear between those two angels and it looks like he's here now because flashes of lightning, sounds, and peals of thunder, an earthquake, and a great hailstorm. So to me it seems like God is showing us, I'm in charge. I'm on the ark, and I'm at home. Isaiah 6 says this, "In the year of King Uzzah's death, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, holy and exalted, with the train of his robe filling the temple. Seraphim stood above him, each having 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called out to another, 'Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory.'" It's almost as like he's trying to tell us that the folks left on earth here are going to somehow be able, I don't know, it seems almost you can see that temple, and I don't know if that's true or not, but if you can't see it, you'll know that it exists at this time. We'll know somehow. So here we come to chapter 12. I don't know how far we'll get with this. It's kind of too bad I'm going to be gone, because I don't want to stop off halfway someplace, but I might have to. The 7th chapter, the 7th trumpet here has sounded, And then we're entering the time of the great tribulation. The two witnesses that preached to the people for the first 3.5 years now, they've gone back, they've died and then gone back. And now we're going to be taken back to the beginning of history. So this is another one of those meanwhile back at the ranch moments. So we're going to leave our timeline and we're going to go way, way back to the beginning of history. We're going to get away from the timeline now. And it's going to give us this chapter is going to just give us an understanding, I think, an explanation so that we can all comprehend the significance of this sign that we're going to see that's going to appear in the heavens. The sign will appear in the heavens at that time, but we're going to go back to the beginning of history to find out what that sign is. So Revelation 12:1, it says, "A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars." And so notice here that John says he does see this great sign. This great sign does appear in heaven. Some translations call it a great wonder. And so by doing that, it tells us basically it's a vision. He sees it, but it's a vision. So it's not literal in that sense, that he saw this as symbolic. And I'm glad he's doing this for two reasons. First, because if you read the Bible and something says, we've said it before, literal if possible. So if it's possible that a man could live in the belly of a whale for 3 days, then it's literal. But it's figurative if it's figurative. And I just misspoke. This sign won't happen. We won't see it. But he's being told what the sign is in a vision. And so if it's literal, if it's possible, it's literal. But if it's a vision, they tell us it's a vision. And the good part about that is he has to stop in the middle of this book, which we could call allegorical all the way through, and tell us, no, this is a vision. Which basically says all the rest of it's not a vision. You see what I'm saying? He's probably telling us that this is a vision, and I want you to know it's a vision because I also want you to know that the rest of the book is true. And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. So we're introduced to this woman who's dressed, who appears clothed in the rays of the sun, and she's standing on the moon with her head, and on her head there's a crown of 12 stars. And since the meaning of this is not really explained here, we think we can go back into the Bible and find some explanations for it. So let's go back into Galatians 4:26. And it says this, it says, "But the Jerusalem above is free, she is our mother." So now we're talking about this woman, and now we're talking as Jerusalem as a mother. So maybe we can put those two things together. Then Joseph tells us that he had a dream. If you remember Joseph in Genesis, he says, "Lo, I have still had another dream." That's in Genesis 7:9. "Lo, I have had still another dream, and behold, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." Remember that? And so who would that be? Who do you think this woman might be?
Mom and dad and siblings.
Yeah, Israel. She's the nation of Israel. The woman represents Israel, and she represents the 12 tribes of Israel. And on the other hand, this is bringing us back all the way to the Garden of Eden in that sense, where God told us that, remember that God told us in the Garden of Eden that the seed of the woman would have strife with the devil, would strive with the devil. So it also represents, this woman represents the entire body of God, the entire body of believers. So it's Jerusalem, and it's the body of believers. It's all who believe. Both the Gentiles and the Jews have been caught up in this age-old battle against good and evil. We're caught up into it right now. And so she kind of represents in this everybody. And the sun is a picture of glory coming up behind her. She stands in the circle of the stars around her, and the crown of stars, if you will, and the sun coming up behind her. And so she could represent the totality of the works of darkness as a woman going against the works of darkness, as of all of us believers and all of the Jewish nation for years fighting away this darkness. 2 Corinthians 11:14 says, "No wonder, for even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light." And what happens is Satan can do the same thing. He can be an angel of light and look like it. I think it was it the Jehovah's Witnesses? Was he the one that saw the angel all of a sudden? I can't remember it.
That was Joseph Smith.
Joseph Smith. Okay, he saw the angel. An angel appeared to him as an angel of light, but we know it wasn't an angel of light. We know who that was. Look at verse 2. It says, "And she was with child, and she cried out, being in labor, in pain to give birth." The child she births here is Jesus Christ. This is Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ came from the Jewish nation, came from this woman, from the line of Abraham. He's the Son of Man and he's the Son of David at the same time. And so the original promise for this upcoming battle is here. We see this, where the woman will battle with Satan, where she'll be victorious, but the world will battle with Satan. Here it is in Genesis 3:15. It says this, "And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel." Basically, he shall crush you on the head, and you will bruise him on the heel. We find out in the history, in the antiquities, that Jesus bruised his heel on the way to the cross, on the way to the hill. So Satan puts this enmity between the seed of the woman and all of those who reject God are against this woman, against the world. John 8:44 says this. They are represented here in John 8:44. "You are of your father, the devil, and you want to do the desires of your father." These are non-believers. These are human beings who haven't been saved. "You are of your father, the devil, and you want to do the desires of your father. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in truth, because there is no truth in him. Whenever he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own nature, for he is a liar and the father of lies." We had that sinful nature, you know that. We have that sinful nature to this day. That's why it's so hard for us to be good. It's easier for us to sin by nature than it is to do good by nature. But we have been thankfully covered by the blood of Christ to take away those sins and at least give us a fighting chance. We can put on God's armor and we can go into battle with him and we can win. Yesterday we mentioned that, I like the thing that Lewis said about the temptation. We never know the full power of God because we give in to our temptations too early. If we truly want to know the power of God, we have enough power to fight any temptation at all. We have that, but we never really find it because we always seem to give in too early. Verse 3, "And another sign appeared in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his head were 7 diadems." And this dragon is special because it's a 7-headed dragon with these 10 horns. And remember the Antichrist, remember when he came in and he set up this 10-nation confederacy? He started with 7 nations, and they kind of just came into play all of a sudden, and everything was kumbaya. They all came together thinking that he was the savior of the earth. And then he kind of had to overtake 3 more. So this kind of represents this evil now empire is represented by 10 nations and by this dragon here, which is Satan, which is the dragon is Satan. 17:10, verse 7, chapter 17:10, "And they are 7 kings, 5 has fallen, one is, the other has not yet come, and when he comes, he must remain a little." The one that remains now is this Antichrist they're talking about. This is the last one. This is in Daniel's prophecy, he had the last ruler of the last kingdom, and this is the Antichrist. He will be the last ruler, of the last kingdom here on earth. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received the kingdom, but they received authority as kings with the beast for 1 hour. 1 hour is just symbolic of this short time period. They're just trying to say a short time period, which is 3.5 years. Basically, it's not 1 hour, but it's symbolic of just a very short time period. Daniel 7 says this, very similar to what we just read. "After this I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying, and extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet, and it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And the meaning of the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn which came up before the 3 of them fell, namely, that horn which has eyes and a mouth, uttering great boasts, and which was larger in appearance than its associates. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom of 10 kings will arise, and another will arise after them, and he will be different from the previous ones, and he will subdue 3 kings." So Daniel prophesies the same event. These 10 nations would come together, and then there would be a leader out of it, which is the Antichrist, and he will subdue them all. Verse 4, 12:4. Now we go back, and it looks like we go back into the great battle that's already been happened, the battle in heaven. It says, and his tail swept away a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he might devour her child. So again, now it's telling us about the fall of Satan, and when he fell from heaven and he fell to earth and he whipped his tail and 1,000 of the angels went with him. It became demons on earth. And when Christ was being born, it says the devil stood there with his mouth open waiting to devour the Son of God. This is the great battle that's just been going on ever since the beginning of time. They're going back to the beginning of the time and just telling that. And then we see Satan, he's been waiting since the birth of Christ. He thought it, when Christ died on the cross, he must have been ecstatic. He must have been happy. I finally killed him. He's done. It's all over. And when he got up 3 days later, it must have just, it was terrible. He knew he was defeated at that particular point. Isaiah 7:14 says, therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, a virgin will be with child and bear a son, and she will call his name Emmanuel. So again, he just tried to devour the child before it was even, as it was being born, as it was here on earth. Revelations 12:5 said, and she gave birth to a son, a male child, who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and his throne. If you have your Bibles or your notes, I would underline the word caught up. What does the word caught up mean? Do you remember what it means? Raptured. The word rapture in the Bible isn't in there, but when you see it, it's caught up. And so what it means is that Jesus too was caught up, wasn't he? He was taken he was buried and dead, and so he was raptured in a sense, caught up and received his new glorified body. And that'll happen to us. The same thing will happen to us at the rapture. We'll receive our new glorified body. Psalms 2:7 says this, I will surely tell you of the degree of the Lord. He said to me, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will surely give the nations as your inheritance, and the very ends of the earth as your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron, and you shall shatter them like earthenware. So this verse in Revelations kind of leads back to this verse in Psalms. I just want to tie the Bible together for you. Does that help, showing you all of these little different Bible verses in here where you can tie all of this together? I think once you tie it together, it's a little bit easier to understand. Then the woman, verse 6, Revelation 12:6, then the woman fled into the wilderness where she had a place prepared by God so that she would be nourished for 1,260 days. So now we're back here because when this started, the 144,000 Jews fled into the desert. The people in Israel that could left the city and followed into the desert. And here's where it says, and the woman, which means who? Israel, the nation of Israel, the nation that comes from God, that is his chosen people, as well as, I believe, other believers too. I believe that also represents some of the believers too, because I think in Israel you're going to find Jews running into the desert with these guys, and when this happens, you'll just have regular people, like I say regular people, I say non-Jews going in there too, other believers, I should say. So she fled into the wilderness and had a place prepared where she would be nourished for 1,260 days. You see, that's that 3.5-year period right here. So we're back to the present, if we will. The Antichrist, again, has revealed himself in the temple. God has revealed himself in his two witnesses. And at this point, too, Jerusalem just probably goes crazy. They were sacrificing in the temple, we said. Remember last week they were sacrificing in the temple, and now they had to stop. The Antichrist has revealed himself in the temple, defiled the temple. God's not happy with the sacrifice anyway because Jesus was the ultimate sacrifice, but now it stops. And I wonder how many Jewish folks at this time have examined these scriptures and how many will come to Jesus. I mean, tons and tons and tons of folks. So they run for this place, and here's what happens. They run for this place they've heard of. and it was a place that's prepared for them in the wilderness, and they run into the arms of these 144,000 men, and so now they're all camped out there in safety for about 1,260 days. Here's where it comes from. Let me show you Matthew 24. You can write this down. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, so that's the Antichrist, that's revealing himself in the temple. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, that's in the temple, let the reader understand that those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. Whoever is on the housetop must not go down to the things that are on his house. Whoever is in the field must not turn back to get his coat. But woe, see the woe, it puts it kind of in that time period. But woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days. But pray that your flight will not be in the winter or on a Sabbath, for then there will be a great tribulation, that's coming, such as not occurred since the beginning of the world until now or ever will. So now the scene changes once again. Let's get into verse 7 here just quickly. And we see this war in heaven. And this time, this is the war that's in the second heaven. The Bible tells us in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. It's plural. There were three heavens. The Jewish folks didn't have the word sky back then like we do. We see birds in the sky. They would say there's a bird in the heavens. And then the second heavens is the universe. We look up at night and see the moon and the stars, and we say, oh, the moon and the stars are in the universe. And they would say the moon and the stars are in the heavens. And then the third heaven, of course, is the spiritual heaven where God is. So in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. There's your three heavens. So Satan has already been thrown out of the third heaven, right? He's gone. Now he does have a dispensation somehow that he can go. Remember he talked to God in Job, but Job doesn't specifically tell us what heaven it was in. Job doesn't say Satan went to see God one day in heaven. It doesn't say the third heaven. It just says in heaven. So Satan was thrown out of the third heaven. So he probably met him in the second heaven. And he took a third of the angels with him, but now at the halfway point, he's being thrown to earth. Satan is going to be thrown to earth. He's going to be on earth for the rest of his days from now on. Ephesians 2:1-2 says, "And you were dead in your trespasses and sins, in which you formerly walked according to the course of this world, according to," see this, "the prince of the power of the air." That's what we talked about earlier. He's the prince today of the power of the air to this day. "And of the spirit that is now working in the sons of disobedience." So he's called the prince of the power of the air and the spirit that's working inside the sons of disobedience. And Ephesians 6:12 says, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in" what? The heavenly places. See it? But now he'll no longer be the prince of the power of the air, nor the prince of the heavenly places. No longer will his presence and his demons foul those two heavens. He'll be thrown to earth, and he has to stay here for the rest of the time. Psalm 115 says, "The heavens are the heavens of the Lord, but the earth he has given to the sons of man." We mentioned that earlier this morning. The heavens belong to the Lord, but the earth belongs to the sinners. And they were not strong enough, and there was no longer a place found for them in heaven, Revelations 12:8. So the demons lost again. They weren't strong enough, they couldn't stay in the heavens, and now they've been regulated to earth. That verse that says there was no longer a place found for them in heaven is best translated, there's no longer a purpose for them in heaven. So it means they no longer have any purpose in heaven there. Obviously, they have a purpose there now. In Job, we found out Satan had a purpose. But at this particular point, there's no more purpose for them in the heavens, and so they're going to be thrown down to earth. But one more thing, I think why they're not allowed back in the heavens too is because the second coming is coming shortly, and we'll be with him in the second coming. And so when God comes down on when Jesus comes down the second coming and he lands on the earth, one foot on the sea and one foot on the mount, we'll be watching from heaven, and we're his bride. And what husband wants her bride in danger with demons around us? And so I think he's throwing all of the demons down to earth and Satan down to earth at this point. And he said, this is your domain from now on. All of this I want clean, I want healthy, and I don't want any more sin there. We can't be near him no more than God can be near him, because he's sinned. So I think that's probably one of the reasons why. And there's no more purpose. When it says that again, it just means there's no more purpose for him. He's played his part. I said this before. God, this isn't a big chess game, and somebody's moving the pieces. God's moving the pieces around. Satan does what God wants. It's not the other way around. So yeah, let's do that. Okay. And the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who was called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Yeah, that's a good place to stop. So, any questions?